Smoke curled from the valley long before anyone saw the ship. The dragons of the Veth settlement smelled it first, hot metal and burned fuel, something sharp and foreign riding the wind down from the north ridge. Old Soreth, the settlement elder, lifted his broad bronze head from the river shallows and tasted the air. He had lived 3 centuries. He had smelled fire, rain, stone, blood, and deep forest. He had never smelled anything quite like this. The ship came down hard on the pale stone shelf above the delta. It did not explode, which was something. It left a long black scar on the rock and sat crooked, hissing steam, with one side of its hull pressed against a boulder as if leaning on it for support. 3 creatures climbed out, soft-skinned, upright, small by any standard that mattered on Veth. They stood in the violet afternoon light and looked around with wide eyes, and none of them moved toward the settlement for a long time. Eventually one of them did. He walked at the kind of pace that said he was not sure he was welcome, but was going to try anyway. He stopped a good distance from the settlement's outer stones, sat down cross-legged on the ground, put his hands on his knees where they could be seen, and waited. 6 hours. He sat there for 6 hours. He did not shout, did not signal, did not move except to pull a small book from his pocket and write in it occasionally. The first to go near him was Lyra. She was not the bravest dragon in the settlement or the most senior. She was simply the most curious, and curiosity in her was stronger than caution in most. Her scales were deep gold with copper running along her spine. She was small, noticeably small for her age, something she had long since stopped apologizing for, and she moved without much noise, which was how she got within 3 steps of the sitting human before anyone realized she had moved at all. He looked up at her. He had dark eyes and a face that was doing something she did not have a word for yet. Later she would learn the word. It was wonder. He spoke. The sounds were soft and rounded, not like Veth's speech, which clicked and resonated in the chest. His sounds moved through the mouth like water. She did not understand a single word, but she understood the tone, the way you understand warmth without seeing fire. He was saying hello, and he meant it. His name, she would learn, was Doran. The other 2 stayed with the ship, running repairs that turned out to be longer and more complicated than expected. But Doran came into the settlement. He was careful. He watched how things were done before touching them. He made mistakes and made a particular face after each one, a pressing of the lips, a small forward tilt of the head, that the settlement eventually understood meant he was sorry and knew it. Dragons did not apologize for mistakes. They adjusted. But they found something almost restful about a creature that said plainly when it had done something wrong. He learned their language in pieces, trading words with Lyra in the evenings by the hearthfire. She learned his language the same way. They met somewhere in the middle, a little of each, enough to build on. He stayed for months. The repairs were slow. No one rushed them, and Doran did not ask them to. In the 3rd month, he showed her the watch. He pulled it from his left breast pocket, always the left, and set it on his open palm. Round, silver-cased, small enough that it nearly disappeared in a human hand. The crystal face had a crack running across it, fine as a hair. Inside, she could see 2 hands. One was still. One moved in tiny steps. Tick, tick, tick. What does it count? She asked. Time, he said. She thought about that. On Veth, time was the dry season and the wet, the rising of the moons, the years between hatchings. In pieces that small, humans do not live as long as dragons, he said, simply, without sadness. We needed a way to make the small pieces matter. She reached out one claw and rested the tip of it against the cracked crystal. She felt the faint movement inside. Tick, tick. Every tick, Doran said, watching her, is proof that someone is alive and still counting. She did not fully understand that then. When the ship was finally ready, a distress call came through Doran's communication system and changed everything in minutes. She could tell by the way he moved, faster, quieter, more careful, that something was wrong far away and he had to go toward it. The other 2 were already preparing the ship. He found her on the rock above the river, the one she used for thinking. He sat beside her. He did not say much. Then he reached into his left pocket one more time. He had braided a cord from something he carried in his kit. He threaded it through the small ring on the watch and held it out. Keep this for me, he said. It is yours, she said. It needs someone to carry it while I am gone. He fastened it around her neck himself, carefully. The watch settled against her chest scales, warm from his body. I will bring you a better one when I come back. You are coming back, she said. Not a question. Humans always come back, he told her. He said it like a fact he had checked and was certain of. She believed him. The watch ticked against her chest. The ship lifted into the violet sky and became a point of light, and then nothing. Lyra pressed one claw to the watch and listened. Tick, tick, tick. She stood there until the moons came up. Nobody counted the days out loud. That was not how Veth worked. But the dry seasons came and went. The moons cycled. Hatchlings grew into young dragons who had never seen a human ship, and eventually the number was 14 Veth years since the ardent shore had lifted off the pale stone shelf above the delta and gone silent. Lyra wore the watch every one of those days. She wore it to the river, to the evening fires, to the high perches where the settlement lookouts kept watch over the valley. She wore it through 2 long droughts and 1 flood that took out the lower weirs and required months of repair. She wore it the day her clutch sister hatched a new generation and the day old Tuven the fire tender finally laid down his tools and did not pick them up again. The cord she replaced twice when it wore thin, cutting new lengths with the same care she gave to things she considered permanent. The settlement had made its peace with the watch. In the early years, there had been comment. Some gentle, asking if she truly believed the human was coming back. Some less gentle, pointing out that the outer systems had gone dark, that war had swallowed whole fleets, that broken alien trinkets were not sacred objects no matter how long you carried them. Lyra did not argue with any of it. She simply continued carrying the watch, and gradually the comments stopped, the way rain stops, not because of anything you do, just because it has run its course. The settlement's archivist, Ren, had been asked to study the watch in the 3rd year. Elder Soreth had wanted it documented. Ren had accepted the assignment without much interest and then became genuinely absorbed, which surprised him. The watch was extraordinary up close. He had never seen anything built at that scale, gears thinner than a dragonfly wing, springs coiled to tolerances he could barely measure. He documented everything over several months. The cracked crystal, the frozen hour hand, the minute hand that moved on warm days and slowed when the air was cold. He documented the inscription on the back plate, which Lyra translated, a name, a date, plain words in a plain hand. He noted the way the mechanism responded to warmth, how holding it against a heated stone could set it ticking reliably for an hour before it wound down again. After 6 months, he came to Lyra with a careful conclusion. It is not broken, he said. Not truly. The mainspring is intact. What has worn down is the part that feeds energy into the spring, the winding mechanism. Small. Replaceable, if you knew what you were replacing. You want to open it, Lyra said. I want to understand it. No, she said. He did not push. He was an archivist. He understood that some things were records and some things were relics, and they were not the same category. He wrote in his journal instead, they build things meant to outlast themselves. The watch is not a tool. It is a statement. I am beginning to think this is the most important fact about humans that I have found. The news from the outer systems came in pieces, carried by traders and passing vessels. War, everyone said. The Surith, a species Veth knew as territorial and systematic, had pushed hard into human space. Colonies cut off. Fleets destroyed. The word survivors was used in the careful way that meant there were not many. Lyra listened to every report. Her expression did not change. Ren watched her during one of the council briefings where the latest information was shared. An elder had said, gently but plainly, that the human populations were likely shattered beyond recovery. Lyra sat through the whole briefing without speaking. Afterward, in the corridor, Ren fell into step beside her. Do you still believe he is coming back? He asked. He was not challenging her. He was genuinely asking, the way an archivist asks, because he wanted to record the true answer. She did not slow down. He said humans always come back. He might not have known what was coming. He left something worth coming back for, she said. That was the point. Ren thought about that for a long time afterward. That winter, on a night when the hearth fire had been built high against the cold, Lyra walked to the great hearthstone at the center of the settlement. It was the oldest fire in the valley, never allowed to go out, its coals going back generations. She pressed the watch flat against the warm stone and held it there with both claws. Ren was across the hall. He did not move. Tick. One tick. Clean and clear. Tick. 2. Tick. 3. Then quiet. Ren looked down at his open journal. He wrote 2 words, and then sat looking at them for a long time, because he did not know what else to write, and felt that anything else would be too much. It remembers warmth. Outside, the twin moons of Veth were crossing each other above the ridge, their silver light mixing in the valley below. The settlement breathed around its hearth fire. 14 years of waiting lay in the valley like sediment, quiet and deep. Lyra walked back to her resting place with the watch against her chest. Tick, tick, tick. Irregular, slow, a little worn. But there. Still there. An archivist's job was to record what happened. Ren looked at those 2 words again and decided they were enough for now. Some records were not finished yet. They were still in the middle of becoming. He closed the journal and let the fire burn, and the moons moved overhead, and the watch kept its own imperfect time in the dark. The Surith ship did not knock. It simply appeared in orbit above Veth one morning, large and unhurried. The way powerful things appear when they have decided that asking permission is a courtesy they no longer need to extend. Commander Rail's message came down to the Veth Council before midday. It was polite. It was also the kind of polite that has a blade inside it, the way certain fruit is sweet on the outside and bitter at the core. The message said, the Surith Enforcement Authority wished to formalize good relations with Veth. All that was needed was a simple declaration that Veth held no alliance, current or future, with what remained of humanity. A reasonable request. A practical one. Surely a civilization as wise as Veth could see the logic. The Veth Council met that same afternoon. Elder Sorith opened the session. He was 3 centuries old and had learned over those centuries that sentiment and survival were different things. He laid out the situation in plain terms. The Surith were present. Humanity was absent. Its fleets were broken. Its colonies were scattered. Choosing a distant, damaged civilization over a present, powerful one was not wisdom. It was a kind of beautiful foolishness that history tended to punish. Several council members agreed. Several were quiet in the way that meant they were not sure yet. The session stretched into evening. Ren was permitted to speak as cultural archivist. He had prepared. He did not argue for alliance. That was not his role. But he laid out everything he had documented in 14 years of study. He showed the engineering records of the watch. He read sections of Doran's notebooks, which Lyra had allowed him to translate and archive over the years. He talked about what he had learned of how humans built things, not just for use, but for duration, not just for themselves, but for whoever came after. They put their intentions into objects, Ren said. The watch is cracked and slow and has been carried for 14 years by someone who is not its maker. It still ticks. I am not arguing strategy. I am asking the council to understand what it is choosing to abandon before it abandons it. Sorith thanked him and called for a preliminary vote. That was when Lyra walked in. She was not a council member. Non-members did not enter during session. The protocol was old and everyone in the room knew it. Several elders straightened when they saw her. Sorith drew breath. Lyra walked to the exact center of the chamber, beneath the great skylight where the late violet sun came through in a column. She did not look at anyone. She reached up with both front claws, lifted the cord from around her neck, and set the watch on the stone floor. Then she stepped back. She did not speak. She did not argue. She did not explain. The chamber was silent. Tick. Everyone heard it. The chamber was large and stone-walled and very quiet, and that one tick was small, but it was real and it traveled to every corner of the room. Tick. A second one. Several elders who had been looking at Lyra now looked at the watch. Tick. A third. And then silence again, but not the same silence as before. This was the silence after a statement, not before one. Every being in that room felt it shift, the way air shifts before weather changes. Sorith stared at the watch on the floor. His expression was unreadable, which was unusual. He was old enough that he had stopped hiding his expressions long ago, because he no longer cared what they revealed. For him to look unreadable meant something was moving inside him that he had not sorted yet. No one spoke for a long time. Then Sorith said, "The vote is postponed. We will reconsider the framing." Council members looked at each other. No one objected. Lyra picked up the watch, looped the cord back around her neck, and left the chamber the same way she had entered, quietly, without looking at anyone, as if she had simply stopped by to leave something and was done. Ren followed her out. He found her in the corridor, standing by the narrow window that looked north toward the ridge where the Surith ship sat in orbit, a dark shape against the stars just beginning to show in the early dusk. "You broke protocol," he said. "I know," she said. "You did not speak." "I did not need to," she said. The watch spoke. He thought about that. As an archivist, he had spent his career believing that words were the primary record, that things only became permanent when they were written, spoken, documented. But he had watched a cracked mechanical object tick 3 times in a stone room and alter the outcome of a political session. He was not sure his understanding of records was as complete as he had thought. "What if the council still votes with the Surith?" he asked. "Then they vote," she said. "But they will do it knowing what they chose to leave behind." Above the valley, the Surith ship burned steadily against the darkening sky. Commander Rail had sent a follow-up message by now. Ren knew the council secretaries would be drafting a polite delay response at this moment. The Surith were not patient by nature. This would not hold them long. But it had held them today, and the watch was back around Lyra's neck, ticking its slow, irregular rhythm against her chest scales in the cooling evening air. Ren opened his journal and wrote one line. "Today the watch argued better than any of us." He closed the book and stood beside Lyra at the window, and they both watched the stars come out one by one above the valley. Pressure does not always arrive as a blow. Sometimes it arrives as a slow tightening, a fee added here, a route rerouted there, an inspection that takes 3 times as long as it should, a permit that was never required before and now suddenly is. The Surith did not attack Veth. They did not need to. They simply made things harder, in ways that were difficult to point at directly, but impossible not to feel. Trade from the outer routes slowed. Supply ships that had docked at Veth twice a season now came once, or not at all, delayed by Surith inspection protocols in the neighboring systems. The medicinal resins that the valley settlements depended on for the cold months became expensive, then scarce, then available only through Surith-approved suppliers, at Surith-approved prices. Everyone understood what was being said. The council had not yet made its declaration. The Surith were explaining the cost of waiting. Veth adapted. It was what the settlement had always done. Rebuilt the weirs when they flooded, replanted after the drought years, adjusted and continued. Orvith, the signal technician, rerouted 3 communication arrays to bypass the monitored frequencies. The settlement's craft workers began producing the medicinal resins themselves, slower and more expensive than importing, but theirs. Elder Sorith accepted the reports of each adaptation with the same expression, not pleased, not defeated, just continuing. Ren spent that year finishing his documentation of human-Veth first contact and sending it through the scholarly networks that still connected the region's academic institutions. It was not a political document. He had been careful about that. It was a record, the events, the timeline, the engineering notes, the translated excerpts from Doran's notebooks. The story of a man who sat cross-legged on pale stone for 6 hours waiting to be approached. The story of a watch. It traveled. He did not expect that. Academic records moved slowly, if at all, through networks that were more interested in biology and star mapping than in first contact histories. But this one traveled. He began receiving responses from institutions he had never contacted, scholars from species he barely knew, writing careful letters asking questions, wanting more detail, copying the record to their own archives. The story of the watch, apparently, translated. Meanwhile, Lyra was teaching. It had begun without a plan. The young dragons who had grown up hearing about the watch wanted to understand it, and Lyra was the only one who could explain it. She started with language, the human words Doran had taught her, still clear after all these years, the syllables she had turned over so many times they had worn smooth. Then the songs he had sung, quiet ones for evening, which she taught by humming and then by words, watching the young dragons try the shapes with their mouths. Then the harder thing, the concept he had spent months trying to give her. A promise kept across distance. But how does a promise work when the person is gone? One of the young ones asked. Lyra thought about it. It works because they built it to work without them, she said. The watch still ticks. He is not here to wind it. It ticks because he made it to tick. A real promise is the same. It runs on its own. The young dragon thought about that with the full seriousness that young dragons brought to things they were trying to understand. Then she asked to touch the watch. Lyra let her. The watch ticked once in the warmth of the small claw, brief and clear, and the young dragon looked up with eyes gone wide. In the 14th year, Orvith flagged an anomaly. He brought it to Ren first, a fragmented signal in the outer system, repeating every 7 hours, old encoding that none of the settlement's current systems recognized natively. Not Surith, not any format in the current register. Old, very old, the kind of format that had not been in regular use for more than a decade. Ren looked at it for a day. He knew what it might be. He brought it to Lyra. She sat with the recording for 2 days. She listened with her eyes closed, replaying it. She went back through everything Doran had ever shown her about his ship's communication systems. Every technical word she had watched him use. Every explanation he had given her in those evenings when she had followed him to the ardent shore and sat on the ramp and watched him work, asking questions until he laughed and answered them. On the 3rd day, she decoded it. A human military vessel, running silent, sitting in the outer system for 6 weeks, watching the Surith patrol lines above Veth, watching the settlement, watching which way things would fall before deciding whether to come closer, waiting to see if it was safe to come home. Lyra read the decoded message 3 times. Then she walked to the signal spire, the tall stone tower on the ridge, the one with the long-range transmitters, and climbed to the top. She had asked Orvith the night before to align one transmitter to a human military frequency. He had done it without asking why, which she appreciated. She held the watch in one claw and pressed it to her chest. It ticked, warm in the morning air, steady and certain. She opened the transmitter channel. She did not plan a speech. She said what needed to be said, in the language Doran had taught her, in her own voice, to whoever was out there listening in the dark between the stars. We are still here. Come home. She held the channel open for a long moment. Then she closed it. The moons moved overhead. The valley was quiet. The watch ticked on. 6 hours after Lyra's transmission, something changed in orbit. The Surith patrol ship above Veth registered it first. A decloaking event in the middle system. A vessel dropping its concealment, running full navigation lights, announcing itself. The patrol ship's systems identified it. Human, heavy class, bearing the markings of what Surith databases listed as the human remnant. The designation applied to the scattered survivors of humanity's broken fleet. One vessel. The Surith patrol captain composed a standard intercept notice. Tone, firm. Language, diplomatic. Intent, clear. The intercept order was good procedure, clean, and routine. Then a second vessel decloaked. The patrol captain paused. 2 vessels changed the tone slightly. He adjusted the order. Then a third. Then 4 more in a line formation. Then 7 vessels jumping in from the outer edge of the system, clean arrivals. None of them lurching or strained. Controlled jumps, precise placement, full navigation lights on every one of them. The patrol captain stopped adjusting the order. Commander Rail, aboard his station ship in high orbit, received the alerts in sequence. He was a methodical person by nature, not given to dramatic reactions, experienced enough that surprise was something he processed rather than expressed. He looked at the scan data. He looked at it again. Then he pulled up the Surith intelligence reports on human military capacity, reports compiled over 11 years, updated quarterly, based on observation, intercept data, and strategic modeling by some of the most competent analysts in the Enforcement Authority. The reports said, scattered, diminished, rebuilding slowly, decades from meaningful capacity. More vessels jumped in, and more, and more. They arrived with a patience that was almost worse than urgency, unhurried, exact, each one slotting into position in a deployment pattern that spread across the Veth system the way you spread your hands to show you are not holding anything. Calm and open and completely in control of the situation. Not charging, not threatening, not doing anything except existing, in numbers that the reports had said were impossible. 57 vessels. Rail's tactical officer counted 3 times. 57 human ships, of varying classes, all running full lights, arranged in a formation across the Veth system that covered every approach and exit without pointing a single weapon array at anything. A formation that said, "We are here, we can see everything, we are not going anywhere, and we have not fired because we have chosen not to." Rail set down the intercept order. He stared at the scan. He thought about the reports, how certain they had been, how often they had been cited in council meetings, how everyone had discussed humanity the same comfortable way for 11 years. Broken, scattered, a problem that had mostly resolved itself. He thought about the confidence of that, the comfort of it, how easy it was to write something off when you watched it go quiet. He had not thought about what quiet could mean. He had assumed it meant weakness. He had not considered that it might mean a civilization putting its head down and working in the spaces no one was watching, building in the systems that had been dismissed, getting stronger in the dark because the dark was where they had been left. They had not sent distress signals, had not asked for help, had not announced their recovery to anyone. They had simply worked and waited, and now they were here. 57 ships in a system the Surith had assumed was theirs to pressure, and they had not said a single word yet, because they did not need to. The fleet's presence was the statement. Rail sent Commander Vel's flagship a formal hailing. Vel answered promptly, in the careful, diplomatic language of someone who has thought through every word in advance. She was polite. She was also the kind of polite that has a fleet behind it. Rail sent a message down to the Veth Council. He wanted the record to show, he said, that the Surith were withdrawing from the Veth system as a gesture of goodwill and an acknowledgement of Veth's sovereign right to determine its own partnerships. He said nothing about the 57 ships. He did not need to. Everyone could see the scan data. The Surith patrol ships and the station ship pulled out in a column that moved at a pace slightly more deliberate than casual, which was the closest they would get to hurrying. On Veth, settlement dragons watched them go. Elder Sorith stood on the ridge where he had stood when the ardent shore had fallen out of the sky, and he watched the Surith vessels grow small and disappear, and he was very quiet. From the human fleet, one ship separated and began its descent. Mid-sized, well-traveled, repaired in several places with materials that did not quite match the original hull, the way old things are repaired when you use what you have and you keep going. It flew with the steadiness of something that had been a long way getting here and knew exactly where it was going. Before it entered the upper atmosphere, it broadcast on an open frequency. This is Admiral Vel of the Human Remnant Fleet. We have received your signal. We are coming down. A short pause, just long enough to be intentional. Is there a dragon named Lyra at your settlement? Ren was standing beside Lyra on the ridge when the transmission came through. He heard her breath catch. A small sound. Barely a sound at all. The sound of someone who has been holding something carefully for a very long time and has just been told they are allowed to rest. She pressed one claw to the watch at her chest. It ticked. Clearly. Steadily. The way it ticked on warm mornings when the sun was already on the stone. Yes, she said softly, to no one in particular and to everyone who mattered. Below in the valley, the settlement was already stirring, coming to the open ground to watch the ship descend through the violet sky. And it came down, steady and unhurried, toward home. Admiral Vel came down the ramp alone. She had left her 2 aides at the ship's base, a quiet decision that the settlement noticed and appreciated. This was not a formal visit with an escort. She walked across the pale stone of the landing shelf with the ease of someone who had been in difficult rooms before and had learned that making yourself smaller sometimes opened more space than filling it. She was not tall. Her hair was iron gray, close-cropped. Her eyes were the kind that had done a lot of calculating and had arrived at a kind of stillness on the other side of it. She carried a small package in both hands, wrapped in a woven material that caught the morning light differently, depending on the angle. Most of the settlement had gathered. Sorith stood at the front. Ren stood to one side with his journal, and for once he had not opened it. Lyra stood at the center, where she always ended up when things mattered. Vel stopped in front of her. She looked at her the way people look at things they have heard about for a long time and are now finally seeing with their own eyes. You are Lyra, she said. Yes, Lyra said. Vel looked at the watch, the cord, the cracked crystal, the battered silver case sitting against the gold scales of Lyra's chest. She looked at it for a moment before she spoke again. He talked about you, she said. Not often. He was not someone who talked about things easily. But when he did talk about you, it was the way people talk about something they still cannot quite believe was real. Lyra waited. The settlement was quiet around them. Vel took a breath, steady and deliberate. Doran died in the 3rd year of the conflict, she said. His ship took a hull breach. He got his crew clear. He did not make it out himself. He was 41 years old. The words landed in the quiet. Lyra stood still. Ren, watching her, saw no dramatic movement in her face, no visible collapse. She was a dragon, and she had been carrying the shape of this news for years, holding the space it would occupy when it finally arrived. She had been ready for it, even while hoping she would not need to be. The watch ticked once against her chest. Soft and clear. Bell continued. Before he died, he left instructions. With his commanding officer. She passed them forward when she retired. The next officer passed them forward again. He updated them every time before he handed them on, right up until 3 months before the hull breach. She paused. The instructions said, if anyone ever reaches Veth, find Lyra. Give her this. She held out the package. Lyra took it in both front claws. The material was soft. Through it she could feel something round and solid, familiar in shape, but with a different weight than what she wore at her chest. She opened it. The watch inside had an uncracked crystal face, smooth and clear. It had all its hands moving, all of them, sweeping in clean, steady arcs. She could feel before she even lifted it that it was fully wound and running at perfect time. She turned it over. The inscription on the back plate was in his handwriting. She knew his handwriting from 14 years of reading his notebooks, the particular slant of it, the way he pressed slightly harder on certain letters. Every tick is proof someone is alive and still counting. I kept my promise. Doran. She read it twice. She did not look up immediately, because her eyes were doing something she was not ready to show a crowd. Around her, not a dragon moved. Not a sound from the settlement. Even the river seemed quieter, though it was still there, still running below in the valley the way it always had. Then she lifted her head. She held both watches up, one in each claw, the old one on its cord, cracked, worn, ticking its slow, imperfect rhythm, and the new one in her right claw, running clean and steady and exact. She held them both in the morning light and looked at them for a long moment. Then she looped the new cord around her neck beside the old one. Both watches rested against her chest. She placed one claw over them, closed her eyes, and listened. Tick, 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 tick. 2 heartbeats, not quite synchronized. One worn and wandering, faithful past all reason. One exact and new, built to carry the intention of a man who understood that a real promise needed to be engineered, not just spoken. Soreth, who had been watching all of this from the front of the gathered settlement, was silent for a long time. Long enough that others began to glance at him. He was looking at Lyra, at the 2 watches, at the woman who had carried instructions for 11 years and delivered them to a dragon on a distant world, at all of it together as a single thing. When he spoke, he did not address anyone in particular. He spoke to the air, to the valley, to the record. I did not understand what humans were, he said. I think I do now. Vel looked at him. She did not explain. She did not need to. 3 weeks later, Veth and the human remnant signed a treaty on a plain table in the settlement hall. Short document. Direct language. The ceremony was small. Before the signing, Lyra set both watches on the table, and everyone in the room looked at them and understood what they were looking at. Not a political arrangement. A recognition. Outside, the valley morning opened wide under twin moons fading into the brightening violet sky. The river moved. The hearth fire burned. And from the center of the settlement, if you were quiet and close and paying attention, you could hear 2 small watches ticking together, one worn, one new, a little out of step with each other, making a sound that was neither fully human nor fully dragon, but something new that had needed both of them to exist. Tick, 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 on and on into the morning, into whatever came next.